Today I'm going to be doing a 2021 superlatives, so I may be 3 months late, but I wanted to highlight some of the best and the worst and the most unique books that I read in 2021, and I am shamelessly copying this idea from Claire Reed's books. I think in 2020 maybe she did a year in review that was superlatives, and I always thought it was a great idea, so here I am 2 years later, and yeah, I hope you enjoy. So I'm going to try to go fast, probably not going to succeed in that, but a genre that I read for the first time in 2021 and ended up loving were graphic novels. So I'm kicking this off with my favorite graphic novel, and that was Coda by Simon Spurrier and illustrated by Matthias Bergara. This is a fantasy graphic novel. There's 3 different volumes, set in a world where magic used to exist, and then there's been an event and magic no longer exists, and it centers on a main character and kind of his relationship with his wife and their place within this magicless world. It's a bit of Mad Max meets Lord of the Rings meets Pixar, all in very good ways. And while I really like the pacing and the storyline here, my favorite part I think is the art and the paneling. It's a super chaotic kind of art style, tons and tons of detail, lots of color. And I just think it's so much fun. I spend more time per page on this graphic novel than any other graphic novel that I've read. And I think it's a really good read for all my fantasy geeks. My biggest disappointment of 2021 was Dune by Frank Herbert. I tried the movie, the book, and the graphic novel, and I have come to the conclusion that it's just not for me. I think that the story is just not super exciting to me, and stylistically I really don't like the book, in particular all the different kind of italicized thoughts that the characters have. I feel like the characters never felt like they were actually thinking that. It was just kind of like a way for Herbert to give the reader information. So yeah, I'm just not impressed. I see how Star Wars stole from it, but yeah, Dune, not for me. I actually DNF'd it. For my most dense read of the year, we have Heaven and Hell by Bart Ehrman. This is, yeah, you need to have a sustained interest in this topic to get your way all the way through it. This is an academic kind of look at the history of religious belief when it comes to heaven and hell, but mostly hell. And so maybe it's worth pointing out right at the beginning that it's written by a non-believer, it's getting reviewed by a non-believer. But I thought it was a fascinating kind of take, pulling the reader through, starting at the Epic of Gilgamesh, all the way through the Old Testament and some of the New Testament, and citing those quite frequently. And what I really, really like is that Ehrman puts these different beliefs in context. So what would it be like as a Christian in 300 AD? How would those beliefs have changed over time? And yeah, I took a ton of notes on this. There are a lot of just like random facts that I pulled from this. And I think that if you have an interest in it, you could really enjoy this. I'm definitely going to read more from Ehrman in 2022. So my least favorite book of the year, which was actually hard to decide on, which is, I guess, not a good thing. But my least favorite book was The End of Men by Christina Sweeney-Baird, I think. This is a plague fic book that talks about a world in which a deadly plague eliminates 90% of all the men in the world. And it's kind of an interesting structure that the author has chosen to take, in that there are almost 20, maybe even more than 20 different point of views and very short chapters that switch back and forth from all these point of views. Now, what I really hate is that about 3/4 of the different characters in the books are all middle-aged white women that pine after their dead sons and husbands, and it gets so old so quickly. I thought this book was so difficult to get through. There's also a lot of like plot holes in it. So for example, like a really famous virologist doesn't hear about the plague until over 5,000 men have died, and I just don't like, it doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like, wouldn't she have heard about it? CNN would have been all over it. And yeah, there's like nothing about how anything in the world changes except these women like pining after their families, which is fine. But I think in that case, the author should have gone with like a single perspective and done like an emotional deep dive. switching between so many different points of views for me means that you should cover a whole bunch of different kind of themes. So like, what about politics? What about economics? What about religion? What about like dating and sexuality? All these things that really aren't mentioned very much, or if at all. And overall, I thought this was a pretty horrible book. And yeah, 1 star. It's my most liked review on Goodreads now. For the book that I'd most like to be seen made into a movie, I have A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I was pretty surprised how much I liked this. This is a kind of, I guess, like a dark Harry Potter, but with a lot of humor. It's set in a magical school, and the school, in contrast to Hogwarts, very much wants to kill all of its students. And yeah, it's a really playful read. I think there could be a lot of imagery. There's a lot of kind of quirky characters and fun visuals. I didn't love the second book as much as I liked the first, but I will still read the third in the series in 2022, but I think this would be a really entertaining kind of adaptation. For my most depressing read of the year, I have a book from Barbados called How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, by Cherie Jones. I'm doing an Around the World book club. This was the Barbados pick, and this is a piece of fiction set near a beach, a fictionalized beach in Barbados, and a lot of bad things happen to some of our main characters. It's a bit of trauma over and over and over again. I think quite a few reviewers called it trauma porn, and I don't know if I disagree with that, but I am really impressed with the writing in this, and I would definitely pick up something by Cherie Jones, but this was definitely one of the heaviest reads of the year, and I think I had to take a day or two break after I finished it. For my most steamy book of the year, I do read a lot of romance. I read a lot of contemporary romance and fantasy romance, which I'd like to talk about more on this channel. But that was for me A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. And I know Sarah J. Maas gets she's viewed in different ways on BookTube, I suppose. But I think that she absolutely kills it when it comes to romantic tension and kind of romantic, playful kind of banter and dialogue. I definitely don't read her for her politics or her epic battle scenes. But in this, I guess, 4th installment of the series, it's almost entirely focused on a romance. And yeah, I thought it was a really steamy, really entertaining read. I think I finished it in one setting and stayed up way too late, but yeah, without a doubt, Court of Silver Flames. My best aged piece, as in the one that I have liked more and more the further from finishing it, is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is I guess, like literary fiction meet sci-fi piece that kind of gently unfolds as you go. It's very kind of, I don't know, like delicate comes to mind when I think about it. But I was surprised how much I really liked this. I read this for a book club, so it wasn't something that I was trying to pick up on my own. And I think you should go into it not knowing anything. But I was surprised, again, like how emotional it was, how good the character development was, and when I finished, I was like, oh yeah, I liked that. And then over time, I really thought about it a lot more and really appreciated like how vivid all of the characters felt. So I guess my best aged, my wine club pick is Never Let Me Go. So I typically read a lot of short story collections. I've really taken a break in the last 6 or 7 months, but I made a video in 2021. It might have been my only video in 2021, but I talked about short stories, and I talked about Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. This is a speculative and contemporary fiction short story piece, mainly centering about race, and it is a heavy hitter. I had to take a little bit of a break after reading some of these stories. I did read it as an audiobook, and all of the narrators were excellent. I think there's a wide variety of stories in here, ranging again from very contemporary to very fantastical pieces. And yeah, it's a really, really good one. I think I haven't read a short story collection where I liked so many of the pieces as much as this one. So my favorite short story collection of the year. So my blood boiler of 2021, or the book that got my heart rate the highest, was Sisters in Hate by Seyward Darby. This is a book about three women that have joined the white nationalist movement, two of which are still in the movement, one who has subsequently left, and it's written by a white liberal woman, reviewed by a white liberal woman, and this was so thought-provoking and also so frustrating to read. I think one of the things that really stood out to me was the various reasons why women joined the alt-right movement. Contrary to what I thought going into the book, sometimes it's not just outright racism. It is a need for community and for something to believe in, which I think made many of these women feel very human to me. Of course, I still fundamentally disagree with the things that they believe, but it was a really well done piece that I found both fascinating and heart-wrenching, and also something that I've continued to think about. I read this in January of 2021, and I still think about it quite often. So if you're up for it, Sisters in Hate. My quirkiest read of the year was The Past is Red by Catherynne Valente. This is a book about a young girl growing up on the Great Garbage Patch on the Pacific Ocean. This is set in some sort of dystopic future where most of the earth has flooded. And I was really impressed with all of the wordplay and kind of quirkiness and I guess naming of things on this garbage patch. I laughed a lot actually reading this, and I thought it was a very unique take on a future dystopian world. The best memoir I read this year, and in the right moment I'll also say my favorite book of 2021, is Crying in H. Bart by Michelle Zauner, who is a lead singer in a band I've never heard of and don't actually like their music, but I do love Zauner's writing. This is a memoir about her growing up a Korean American in Portland, and also the subsequent kind of process of her going through losing her mom to cancer. And while luckily I cannot relate to her at all when it comes to kind of her grief and her grieving process, how Michelle Zauner, who is half Korean, how she feels going down an H Mart aisle is how I feel going down like a Vietnamese grocery store market. And all of her kind of descriptions on how she fits in and relates to her mother's culture were really things that resonated with me. I tabbed this all up, and I haven't annotated a book since like over a decade. I'm not an annotator, but there were so many passages that I felt really stood out to me and really resonated to me. And when I finished this, it made me really appreciate, representation in books, right? It's so rewarding, and it feels so good to read books that you can see yourself in, that you as an individual can relate to. So it's an important thing to have diversity in your reading. But yeah, Crying in H Mart, I think some beautiful writing, some very reflective pieces. And again, I don't know if I would like this as much if I couldn't relate so much to, Zauner's experiences being half Asian. But yeah, it really twisted my heartstrings. And I listened to this on audio, and I immediately went out, bought a hardback, and kind of reread it almost right away to add in these annotations. So I would highly, highly recommend. But yeah, Crying in H Mart. And lastly, I guess two categories in the last, I have Page Turner and Favorite New Author of the Year, and they're combined because the biggest page turner for me was The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown, who is my favorite new author of 2021. I read 3 of his 4 pieces last year, and he is like an auto read for me now. He's an American historian focusing on typically like not obscure events, but small histories of I guess American citizens. And he is an amazing nonfiction writer because he's incredibly well researched. He is thoughtful in his writing. It's really exciting, but it's never sensationalized. He never fabricates anything to like kind of help the reader be in the moment. So for example, when he writes about the Donner Party crossing a field, he himself, drove to a field in North Dakota and was like, what does this field sound like? What does this field feel like when I cross over it? How does the wind rustle through the grasses? And I really like that. He tends to focus a lot of his pieces around a single person. So this page turner, Indifferent Stars Above, about the fateful Donner Party and their crossing to California. He focuses on a single individual within the party and what her experiences might have been like. And he goes on a lot of these tangents, right? So he talks about, what would birth control be like on an expedition west? What would you pack and stuff like that? And so he goes through all of these little kind of side pieces along the main historical narrative. And yeah, some of his other books, like The Boys in the Boat, I had no interest in reading and didn't want to read it all, but I trusted the author and I picked it up, and those ended up being 5-star reads this year. So Daniel James Brown is definitely my favorite, not only new author, but just author in general. And in particular, the book that I've been mentioning, Indifferent Stars Above, about the Donner Party. I know this is a page turner because I can read books with my eyeballs a lot faster than I can read them with my ears, and I switched from an audio version to an ebook version because I really wanted to know what happened, and it was so engrossing. So yeah, that was some of my favorite books of the year. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed some superlatives, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.